you just told, is that a true story? She'd look at us from the top of her glasses and say, well, of course it's a true story. But it may not have happened. What she was saying is profound. All stories are true. It doesn't matter if the circumstances in them really happened or not, because the truth is the journey you take through that story. Did it make you laugh? Did it make you cry? Did it make you wonder about things you've never thought about before? Well, but that's the truth of the story. Now, interestingly enough, the very first story she ever told me, you guys, is the very first book I wrote. Because I always want to know which one that is. I'm going to show you. This is it. It's about that thing you see up in the sky. What is that thing?
A meteor.
What's a more common name for those? Shooting star. Very good. How many of you have been lucky enough, especially in the summer, to look up and see these things streaking along? Okay, hands down. How many of you have heard the minute you see a shooting star, you make a wish on it because the wish is going to come true? Oh, very good. All right, hands down. Well, what would you do if one night you're standing out in your yard? You look up and you see one streaking across the sky, and all of a sudden that thing starts tumbling, and it crashes right into your yard. Ooh, what do you think you'd do? Besides running and screaming, I just heard somebody say it. They just said it. They said, oh, I have a wish. Do you know that that's exactly what this story is about? Yeah. It's about a meteor that landed in a yard that people wished on. What you may not be aware of, you guys, this is a true story. It actually happened on this little farm. You see the end papers. Hang on. I'll get you a photograph. Hang on just a second. This is a picture of what the farm actually looked like. This is my drawing. This little farm is in Union City, Michigan. Now, my farm is in Union City, Michigan, but it isn't this one. I live maybe 5 miles from here. Union City, Michigan is about 12 miles south of Battle Creek, Michigan. Battle Creek, Michigan is where Post and Kellogg cereal companies are. All your cereal comes from Michigan. So this place is real. Where the story is misleading, when you hear it, it's written in the first person, which is a very fancy way of saying, I stood there that night and I watched this whole thing happen. Well, you guys, I didn't see this happen at all. My mom saw it happen. Actually, when she was much younger than you. This all happened before I was born. So this wasn't my house. This is where my grandparents lived. But I lived with them when I was a little girl. When I lived there, the meteor was already on the ground. It was a meteorite that sat right about where you see my finger in the front yard. And here's the beauty of story. I will never forget the day my grandmother rucked out into that yard, walked up to this big old rock, stopped and pointed at it and said, Felicia, do you want to know how this got here? I looked at it and said, well, I mean, that's just an old rock. She said, a rock, is that all you can see? I looked really hard, and I'm telling you that's what it looked like to me. She said, well, a rock is all you can see. Why should I waste a very good story on you? I said, you're telling me that's not a rock? She says, no, it's not a rock. I said, it hasn't always been there? No. Well, then where did it come from? She pointed straight out. I remember looking at the sky and looking at that rock thinking, she has got to be kidding. But she wasn't. So I'm going to tell all of you about the night that this happened. Ooh, more than that. You are going to hear a very mysterious legend about this rock. So the family you see sitting here, in the book it's going to say that girl was me. And one of those boys was my brother, the other was a cousin. That is absolutely not true. That is not who they are. That little girl is my mother. Those 2 boys, they're her brothers, so that makes them my uncles. You guys, this happened over 90 years ago. I do know this. It was the month of August. And I know it all began at about 11:30 at night. Now, as it got dark, bright as daytime. Only think of it, this is almost midnight, so could that be the sun? No. Everybody got up and they ran to the front windows to see what was coming. And that's when they heard the sound. Ooh, something was coming out of the sky. When they looked up, there it was. Great big fiery ball with a long fiery tail. And that thing was tumbling in over the trees. It streaked in over the fields. And down it came. On fire, bright, loud, and it landed with a boom! My mother says that house shook. And everything was quiet again. Now in the book it's going to say this thing landed in the backyard, no it didn't, in the front yard. Front yard of that farm is about as big as your gym. I walked through your gym, it's that big. So there they were in their living room and they looked out the front window to see what hit their yard. And they saw a great big hole and dirt and earth had been thrown everywhere. And in that hole there was something glowing. When the family went out and looked, oh my, there was a glowing, hissing, steaming, red-hot piece of falling star. I'm telling you, there it was, right there in the yard. Can you imagine? Now, my grandpa left it in that hole, probably for a few days. You realize, usually these things burn up in the atmosphere. They don't make it in. But if they do, they're going to be hot. You can't handle them for a while. So he left it in the hole, but then eventually invited his neighbors who were farmers to come over. And they brought their shovels and their picks, and they dug around the edge of it, pulled it out of the hole. But they let it stay exactly where it slid to a stop. Well, people started coming from everywhere to look at it, wouldn't you? Do you know what's interesting? Anybody that came to that farm to see it, they were fascinated by it, but no one wanted to get very close to it. It made them nervous. Well, but one man did. And he started the legend you are now going to hear, because he was the first person ever to walk right up to it. He was also the first person ever to touch it with his bare hand. Well, see, Grandpa and the other farmers, anytime they handled that thing, they were wearing great big thick work gloves. No one touched it with their skin. But he did. So he looked at it a minute, wondered about it, reached down, and gave it a touch. Oh, he did. He said, ooh, I felt some sort of energy come out of that thing right into my hand. Well, I mean, it doesn't hurt. It's tingling, just like my hand's asleep. He left the farm that day. All he's thinking about was his hand. Do you know, in 3 days, he was back. Now, he was wild with excitement. Took my grandpa out by that thing and said, okay, you have something incredible here. My grandpa said, well, of course I do. I've got a falling star. How many people have that sitting in their yards? He says, no, you don't understand. This does something extraordinary. My grandfather said, what are you talking about? The man said, well, remember when I was touching it, I was thinking of something I wanted so much to happen. I was wishing. That's what I was doing. He said, I touched it, I felt the energy, and I made that wish. And he says, and here's what you're not going to believe. He said, by the time I got home, I wish it really happened. Oh, my grandfather squinted up his eyes and stepped back and said, now just a minute. What on earth would that thing have to do with wishing? The man's answer was this. That's not from this earth. Maybe it does things that none of us understand. And you know, he was absolutely right. He started telling everybody what it would listen. People were coming to my grandpa's farm from everywhere, walking up to that thing, touching it, feeling the energy, making their wishes. And of course, in my family, we did the same thing. You know what we found out?